حي على الفلاح.
One of the, kind of more amusing moments in the life of Abu Ayyub is when the Prophet ﷺ married Safiya. Safiya was coming from a warring tribe, and that was attacking the Prophet ﷺ. So the night of their wedding, Abu Ayyub, he slept outside the hujrah of the Prophet ﷺ with his sword out. Reason being was because he was concerned that Safiya may try to hurt the Prophet ﷺ. So he was sitting outside with his sword out. So the Prophet woke up in the morning and he came out and he saw Abu Ayyub. He's like, "What are you doing?" He said, "I was just, protecting you just in case Safiya thought to do something." So the Prophet left. He said, "You can get up and go." But that just goes to show you the spirit that they had. Their entire lives revolved around the person of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His actual name is Khalid ibn Zayd ibn Kulayb. He was from the Ansar, which means he was from Madinah. And he was from the tribe of Banu Najjar, which was one of the illustrious tribes of Medina, and which also happens to be the tribe that the Prophet's mother, Amina, descends from. Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari, he entered into Islam amongst the early Ansar, or the people from Medina, who came into Islam. He was impacted by the da'wah of Mus'ab ibn Umair when he went kind of quietly and was sent by the Prophet ﷺ. And he was amongst those who were present during the second pledge of Al-Aqaba. Now, one of the most honored moments in the life of Abu Ayyub, and the ones that really kind of makes me feel so envious in a positive way of Abu Ayyub, was actually during the Hijrah itself. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ, when he went from Mecca to Medina, we know that he initially stopped for a brief rest right at the outskirts of Medina. He stopped in a place called Quba. But what's so remarkable is that although he was only there for 4 or 5 days, some say 3, the Prophet built the first mosque. Now, when he left Quba, and now he started to go towards Yathrib, which is known as Medina today, the Prophet ﷺ was obviously swarmed by all of the Ansar. And what did every single Ansari want? They wanted to host the Prophet ﷺ. So these tribes would run around the Prophet's camel and literally trying to drag the camel towards their house. Because what an honor to be able to host Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he would say, "Leave it, for it is commanded." Eventually, Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari was the one who was blessed and honored and granted. It settled in front of the house of Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari, being the person who is allowed to host the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so Abu Ayyub's house was comprised of 2 floors. It's a very simple structure. And so the first night, the Prophet ﷺ, he told Abu Ayyub, "You and your wife sleep upstairs, I will sleep downstairs." And so Abu Ayyub and his wife, they went upstairs. However, as soon as they went up, the guilt overwhelmed them. And they began to think to themselves, how dare we be above the head of the Prophet ﷺ? And they both say that they literally could not sleep all night. And all night they say that they walked around as if they were walking on eggshells, literally tippy-toeing slowly so that they don't cause any type of discomfort to the Prophet. And so after that night they came down, they said to the Prophet, "Ya Rasulullah, we cannot handle the idea of being above you, so please come up." So the Prophet eventually agreed and he went upstairs. Abu Ayyub and his wife, they would prepare the food of the Prophet ﷺ. And for 7 months they would prepare it at the same time. For Asr, the Prophet would generally eat around that time. And so even after the Prophet left their house, and because of his love for the Prophet, he would continue to prepare the food. Another thing that was beautiful about Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari, by the way, with regards to food, was every single time the plate of the Prophet came back to him, after the Prophet would eat, Abu Ayyub would look for the fingerprints of the Prophet, and he would find them, and he would put his fingers there, and he would lick his hands, to just get some of the blessings of where the Prophet ﷺ placed his fingers. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So one day, Abu Bakr exited his house, and he was walking, and he found Umar radiallahu anhu in the pathway. And he said to Umar radiallahu anhu, "What brought you out of your house?" He said, Ya Abu Bakr, I have not eaten in 2 days. I'm starving. And so Abu Bakr said to Umar, "What brought you out of your house is what brought me out of my house. I have not eaten in days." Then the two of them are walking, just looking for anything to eat. Now, just take a step back and think about who we're talking. Abu Bakr was a man who was of high standing, a wealthy businessman. In his time owned 9 businesses. Umar was of high standing from his people. And suddenly, they sacrificed everything. And they designated all the resources to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now they're literally walking in the street looking for food. And so the two of them, they bumped into the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet said to them, "What brought you out of your houses?" They said, "Ya Rasulullah, we're hungry, we haven't eaten in days." And so the Prophet said, "Wallahi, that what brought me out of my house was what brought you out of your house. I have not eaten in days." 3 men who were of high standing in their community, in their society, were all looking for food. And so the Prophet said, "I know where to go." Where did he go? To the house of Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari. And of course, Ayyub was ecstatic. She said, "Naam ya Rasulullah, please welcome you and your friends. Come in, sit down." And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "Where is Abu Ayyub?" She said, "He's out in the fields working with the palm trees." So she called for Abu Ayyub, and she was excited, and then Abu Ayyub got excited, so he immediately brought with him, he cut some dates, all of different kinds. And the companions, Abu Bakr and Umar and the Prophet, began to eat. And then Abu Ayyub said, "Hold on, Ya Rasulullah, I have a sheep." And then he tells Ayyub, "Please bake some bread that the Prophet ﷺ likes." And she goes and she bakes the bread. And so suddenly the Prophet looks down and he sees 3 types of dates. He sees meat, he sees bread, he sees water, and he begins to cry. And then he tells Abu Bakr and he tells Umar, "Wait, don't eat." He said, "Look at this. We went from nothing, and right now we're sitting and we have 5 types of food that you will be asked about on the Day of Judgment." And he points at the food, and these are 3 men who are starving. And they're about to eat, and the Prophet says, this is what Allah means when He says you will be asked about your blessings on the Day of Judgment. The Prophet ﷺ also, before he ate, he took a piece of bread and he put a big piece of meat. And then he went to Abu Ayyub and he said, "Please take this to my daughter Fatima, for wallahi she has not eaten or seen anything like this in days." You see the Prophet's love for his own daughter. A few things just to understand about Abu Ayyub is that he was actually one of the great scholars of the companions, and he was actually one of the great ruwah of hadith, where Abu Ayyub says, "Give me advice, Ya Rasulullah, and be brief in that advice." And so the Prophet ﷺ says, if you stand up to pray, then pray the prayer of someone who's leaving this world. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, and don't use or speak in language or in words that you will be apologetic for tomorrow. And then the last advice that the Prophet ﷺ gives is, he says that you should have despair in that which is in people's hands. So someone has something that you want. You don't care about that. You literally have despair. You have zero care or want or desire for that which is in that person's hands. That you're not, sitting there aggressively looking for someone to give you something. You're okay if that sister doesn't come and give you XYZ. All you want and everything you desire and seek out is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This gives you a sense of honor when you operate in life this way. One of the last points that I'll mention before I get to the end of the life of Abu Ayyub is actually during the haditha of Ifk, accusing the Prophet's wife of something, and it caused an utter frenzy in society. The Prophet was distraught, Abu Bakr was distraught. It was such a hard time for the Prophet ﷺ. When Abu Ayyub heard about this, when he heard about the claim made against our mother Aisha, he was sitting with his wife Ayyub. This was the talk of the town. And so Ayyub brought it up. And immediately Abu Ayyub said, stop. You are someone that you and I know will never do such behavior. He was telling Ayyub, I know that you're an honorable woman, and you know you're an honorable woman, and you'll never, ever do something like that. May Allah protect us all. And so he said to her, do you think that you're better than Aisha? She said, of course not. And so Abu Ayyub said, then she definitely did not do this. And then many of the Mufassirun say that this verse was revealed, that when they heard this, the men and women of the companions, the righteous companions, when they heard this, they believed in their heart of hearts, good. And they said this is a great lie against our mother Aisha. And so subhanAllah, many of the Mufassirun say that this verse was revealed in accordance with many of the companions, and one of the companions that were mentioned was Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari. He lived for 80 years. So why was he buried in Istanbul? Abu Ayyub was someone who never missed any of the conquests or the expeditions with the Prophet ﷺ, or even after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. He attended almost every single one of them. And so when he was 80 years old, it was during the reign of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and his son, Muawiyah's son Yazid, was taking an army to go towards Constantinople. And so Abu Ayyub said, I want to go out with you. He's 80 years old and he's sick. And the reason why he said, I want to go out, is because the Prophet ﷺ had said a particular hadith, that Al-Qustantiniya there will be a conquest there in Constantinople. And the emir of that army is a great emir. And that army is a great army. And so Abu Ayyub wanted to be a part of that expedition. But as they were traveling towards Constantinople, he got very, very sick. And so he called Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And he said to him, listen, when I die, I want you and a group of companions to take my body and to go as far as you can beyond the walls and the fortress of Constantinople. Go inside, basically enemy territory, and I want you to bury me there. That's where I want to be buried, because I want Muslims to forever remember this land and where I am, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now this happened roughly in the year 51, 52 Hijrah. When did the actual conquest of Constantinople happen? 1453, mashallah. On the hands of Muhammad al-Fatih, which was roughly 800 years after Yazid took the army and went there. It was at that point that Constantinople was conquered, subhanallah. He is a companion who was buried on that side. And when the king found out that he was buried there, out of honor for Abu Ayyub and out of reverence for a companion of the Prophet, they didn't touch his grave. You know, these were people who were enemies of the Prophet. And Muhammad al-Fatih, it is narrated that when he saw the grave of Abu Ayyub, he was overwhelmed in tears to know that this man, 800 years earlier, tried to do the thing that Muhammad al-Fatih was able to eventually accomplish, because they all knew of the hadith that the Amir, the leader of this army, will be an honorable person. And so that's why we all collectively, we have a good opinion of Muhammad al-Fatih because of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.